Today, we're going to talk spoiler-free about the Poppy War series. And I think I can do this all spoiler-free and give you a good idea if this is a series that is good for you. Should you read it? Is it worth it? And I definitely have strong opinions, but I'm going to try and present them in a way that's hopefully useful. And maybe at the end, I might go on a spoiler tangent, but I will give you ample warning. There will be timestamps. I will have a spoiler warning on the screen. But let's get into it. The Poppy War. This is a booktube darling. This is a series that I've read approximately close to as it's come out. I read the first book 2 years ago, I read the second book last summer, and I just read The Burning God. So I read them each about 6 to 8 months separated from each other, and I did read a recaptions before getting into The Burning God, but for the most part, it was a series that I was able to not have to reread as I went, which is a plus. There were definitely issues with names, but that's always a thing with me. When I'm reading a long series and I haven't read one for a while, that's not unique to this series. The Poppy War itself, that first book, was such a surprise. I picked it up and I knew it was military fantasy, which is not and never has been my favorite subgenre of fantasy. But I was really excited because it had a very direct, approachable prose style. That's one of my favorite writing styles. Makes it go by really fast. It actually leaned into a lot of tropes that I found comfortable that you typically see in a young adult work and not an adult work like this, which I found comfortable. I do know that in the Poppy War, the first book, a lot of people talk about there's this huge tonal setting shift. And that's really true. You go from military school setting to military battle, and it is jarring, and there's definitely a lot of graphic depictions of war. It's actually based off an historical world. This is very much heavily based off certain events and political things that happened in 20th century China, from what I can tell. And actually, I'm going to have in my description the Library of Alexandria's historical video on the Poppy War series, which the historical context is very interesting to me. But you definitely don't need it to read this story. It's interesting also that it is a 20th century based story. I found that really interesting because it still very much felt like a fantasy book, even though it was so contemporary, right? The 20th century is not that long from here. Like, this book was taking place, I think, less than 100 years from our current time period, if you were to think of it that way. And Rin is a character. She is, I think, a very polarizing character. You're going to really get her, you're really going to not get her. She's a lot. I actually think I fall very much in the I don't mind following her. She is not someone I'd want to be friends with. She does not think like I think, so she's not very relatable, but I don't mind her being the lens in which we see most of this story. So there's that. I mean, I do have some character problems, but they're not specific for Rin. The character problems that I'll talk about throughout this review are more general character work issues I just tend to have with the series overall. But I really liked The Poppy War. The first book, I blazed through it. It's over 500 pages. I think I read it in 3 or 4 days, which for me, really fast. That means, like, I mean, I'm still reading at my normal reading speed of like maybe 50 pages an hour, which means I took out 10 hours of my life over that time period to read that book. I was really into it. Now, I wasn't very connected to the characters. I don't think a lot of time was spent there. You really only got Rin and how Rin keeps trying to find where she belongs throughout the story. And it's a little disjointed in that way, but it made sense, and it was such a page turner. So I couldn't put it down, couldn't fault it for that. Easy 4-star read. Then I read The Dragon Republic. And it was a little hard to get into, mainly because I had spent 9 months since I read the first book, so I had to get reoriented, and I think the prologue isn't even with Rin. But although I didn't think the plot was as fast-paced or as engaging, loved the character interactions. We are getting to see so many character interactions that I had such a good time with, and we get to kind of see the larger scale of things. Like, before, we're really with Rin, who's young, you know, is in the military as a grunt, learning about the fantastical elements of the world, and we really see the fallout of decisions Rin has made in the Dragon Republic. We get to see different character interactions. We get to see the global political scope of it all. I thought the Dragon Republic was a really, really solid entry, and although it did less of what I liked in the first book, it did things that I typically really love in books extra well. Like, I loved the character interactions, and it gave me so many, like, like, oh my gosh, what just happened moments, like, because I was invested in the characters and the interactions. So when big plot points happened, I was super invested. I was very into that. And I'm typically the type of reader who loves character interactions on page. So the plot wasn't as fast-paced, but I still really liked that. I did feel that it was a little long, but it wasn't too bad. And that book was like 670 pages. And I still read that within the course of a week, which is pretty fast for me. And then the Burning God, which is shorter than the Dragon Republic. And I guess I still read it in a week, but it felt like a book that would never end. It didn't give me an engaging plot, and it didn't give me the character interactions I wanted. I have a lot of issues with the Burning God. Like, up to this point, it's been a 4-star series. Maybe not a favorite of all time for me, but if it's military fantasy, I'm never going to love a military fantasy book. That's not the type of things I like to explore thematically all the time. When I explore military things, I like it more in my sci-fi space. But here, I had a lot of issues, and I think it showed a lot of the flaws I'd been having to a higher degree in these works. So, for example, character work on an individual level. Like, for the most part, characters just come and go as the narrative needs them. We just won't think about characters for long periods of time unless they're needed in the scene that they're needed, which I didn't like in the Dragon Republic. There was a whole crew of people that were important in the first book that didn't really play a role in the second book until like an emotional moment, and then it didn't feel emotional because I hadn't spent time with them. And that happens like repetitively. That if the character isn't narratively needed in the plot, we don't think about them, we don't develop them, we don't talk to them, which I didn't love. But if you just look at an individual character, there are a lot of inconsistencies. And sometimes you can wave away the inconsistencies as, I don't know, an effect of the magic system. For example, with Rin, a lot of her inconsistencies I can sort of see. I can maybe get behind it. But there are certain traits that characters are given very early on, like this person's the big strategist, this one's really determined and hardworking, this one's the best fighter, you know, like things that we have seen and been told. Like, it's not just told to us, we have seen it on page, who these people are, but then suddenly they make decisions, they do actions that don't make sense. Or like, I don't know, you're supposed to be that smart and you can't latch on to this idea, like you're not that smart to me now. It's very inconsistent. It feels like some of those things happen for the narrative and less for character development. There's one character who I'm just like, what was your motivation in this book? Like, why 1 minute are you like this and the other one you're like that? Like, these are the inconsistencies I'm talking about, where it didn't really feel grounded. And there are some moments where I think it could have been, and it made sense, but it happened with almost every major character that I was like, I don't understand why you're doing what you're doing. And in a book that is 620 pages long, that's the third book in a series that has had 1,200 pages, I think that's an issue. Because we should have, at least for the main characters, like Rin and Kate and Nezka, I'm probably saying his name wrong, but we've had a lot of time with these characters. We should understand their motivations, or understand why their motivations are wavering, which I do think with Rin, it's kind of understandable, but you could also very much poke holes in it. I could see either argument. So that's a big one for me. Character work's big for me, especially because the plot of this book, it's literally like, I've said this, friends of mine have said this, this is not a unique opinion, but there's a lot of plot moments and you're just left like, what was the point? Like, there are whole arcs that are hundreds of pages, that are slow paced, and then you get to the climax of that arc and you're like, why? Why? What was the point? I don't understand. This happened way too fast, like the climax just goes by like that, and you're just like, this is what we built up to? It was very unsatisfying for me. There was a point where that happened to me. This happens multiple times in this book. This is a pattern. But this pattern happened, and I wanted to DNF the book. I don't DNF books very often. And this is like the third book in a series. It's the end of the series. The fact that I almost wanted to, because I really kept reading just to get to the end, because everyone seems to have controversial opinions on the ending. I actually liked the ending. The ending's fine. Honestly, I don't know how you end it any other way. I was fine with the ending. I don't like how long this book was. And I read long books. But this book's pacing, man, it was all over the place. The lack of focus. I didn't understand why we were in certain parts. I didn't understand the reintroduction of certain things. I didn't understand the absence of certain things. This is more from Alan's review. There is a certain force that is introduced in the Dragon Republic that makes it cool and global, and the political intrigue and the discussions thematically on cultural erasure. That is not present in the Burning God in any major way. So I had issues with that. I have issues with the magic system. I don't mind soft magic. I think this is pretty soft, or at least it's it's a magic system that I think gets affected by the narrative and what the narrative needs. Like, depending on how powerful or weak we need our characters to be, a magical thing happens to either weaken or strengthen the character. There's a lot of magical plot conveniences. At least that's how it felt as I read it, which I don't like. I don't mind soft magic. I tend to like hard magic just because I think it's usually based on science, and I think that's cool. But I don't like soft magic where I don't understand why some people are powerful or not at any given point. It feels very hand-wavy, and that's just not my favorite experience. So yeah, is it worth it though? Like, do I still think this series is worth it? Like I said, first 2 books are solid 4 stars. If I had to rate the 3rd book on its own merits, it's like a 2.5 star book, guys. Like, I did not like it. I almost DNF'd it. And then I'll be honest, when I was reading the last part, the part that should carry you through, make you intrigued, I was kind of low-key just frustration hating it. I don't really know. Like, I didn't hate the book, but I was just like, why is this book not over? Like, you get to a climactic point, and then you know it's going to be falling action for 100 pages. That's so long, especially in a book where I wasn't given buy-in into the characters anymore. Like, we weren't given character interactions this book. There was just a lack of character work. You get to follow Rin. And that was fine. I honestly didn't mind. I do think Alan makes a good point in his review where he said it would have helped to have an additional point of view. And I think that's so right. Because honestly, the parts at the end that I got excited about was when that character was on page. I have some issues with this last book, and I think the ending's really good. So in the context of the whole series and the whole arc of the whole thing, I will probably give this last book 3 stars. The ending saves it from that 2 to 2.5 star rating, I think, at least right now, in the moment, the day I finish the book. It could be one of those things that as I think about it longer and longer, I just get angrier and it makes the rating go down. Who knows? That's happened in the past. This is by far my most disappointing read of 2021. And I don't know if I can recommend the series. Like, each book itself is a complete story. It's a complete military story, but it's not like it's a complete thought that you wouldn't want to keep going. You know, I mean, part of the reason I picked this up is I was really intrigued to see what Rin would do in the situation presented at the end of Dragon Republic. But like, it's kind of interesting, right? You have these 3 military stories with a whole overarching arc that is relatively satisfying, but you have to slog through this really long book. So I don't know. If you think you'll be cool with it, that'd be great. I think one of the reasons it slogged for me, if you want to know a little bit, this isn't a spoiler, is that there was a lot of strategic and tactical discussions while people are traveling. So these aren't the discussions I care about, and they were mostly internal reflections. Like, there was a whole page about ranged warfare. I'm like, I don't really care about this. And I don't know, like, I don't care about that part of military fantasy at all. Like, I don't care about this strategy or tactics. Like, they were down to the tactics. So that was a large part of the stuff I would have cut out. I would have cut out most of part 2. There are lots of things that I would change about this book. But if you don't actually mind that, and it is still a very accessible writing style. So like I say, it was long. I still only read it in the course of a week, which is about like 90 to 100 pages a day, in addition to other books I'd been reading. So it's not like a waste of your time. But it was disappointing for me. And I don't know, I'm a big ending lander. And although it ended the landing of the arc, the execution was not there on so many points that I can't even bring up because I'm making this spoiler free. So I don't know. If you don't mind Rin as a character, it might not be that bad going all the way through. If you dislike Rin, if you've read the first 2 books and you're like, should I pick up The Burning God? If you disliked Rin, I don't think you're gonna suddenly like her in this book, and it is very much all centered around her. Like, I know the series is called The Poppy War, but it's really about Rin. It's not actually really about this nation and how it goes through wars. Like, yes, that's happening, but it's really about Rin and her journey. So yeah, not even conflicted. I'm just very annoyed at that reading experience. Because I don't know, I read it and I was hoping to like it, but there were just lots of things that I didn't like, and it piled on. And then it became that thing where you're bored, so all you can do is think about the things you don't like. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. If you want to know spoiler thoughts, let me know, and I will make a little video on that. But I just wanted to make, hopefully, I don't know if this is useful, but a way of you to spoiler-free see, is the journey of this series worth it for you? Because our time is finite. Right? This is like an 1,800 page series. Is this series worth your time? And honestly, if you want a military fantasy that pulls on your heartstrings, I gotta say, you get so much more. And like, I don't know, my favorite military fantasy is probably The Sword of Kaigen. And I don't mean to compare these two because they're both Asian-inspired fantasy. They're very different and they're inspired by different things. But like, I had so many emotions in The Sword of Kaigen. That's 700 pages. You know, like, if your time is valuable to you, I preferred The Sword of Kaigen to this entire trilogy. I'm trying to think of other military fantasies I've read. A military sci-fi I love is the Machineries of Empire series. I loved that. That is 900 pages for 3 books about. Maybe it's 1,000. So, I don't know. I mean, you know your reading tastes. If you watch this channel, you know my reading taste. That's all I really have to say. And if this was a book you really liked, I am so happy for you. I wanted that. I wanted nothing more to enjoy all like 11 hours of how much time I spent in this book. It just wasn't the case, and I'm bummed about it. I'm really bummed. I'm upset. But if you made it this far, put a dragon down in the description. That seems right. That I talked about the Dragon Republic. That works for me. And if you have opinions, feel free to talk about them. If you want to talk spoilers, I recommend you come over to my Discord, because we actually have been talking about the book over there. But if you do want to make it a comment, make sure you type whatever book spoilers, type enter a few times, and then leave it so that nobody gets spoiled. That's not what we're here for. And otherwise, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to. Sorry if I hated your favorite book. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.